They told us Pluto was the frozen leftover, too small, too far, too dead to matter. Then NASA got close enough to see the surface, and the first real shock was not the heart. It was the missing scars. Because on a world this old, this far from the sun, the ground should be wrecked with impact craters. It should look ancient, untouched, finished. Instead, one of Pluto's brightest regions looked almost wiped clean. That changes the story immediately. Not because Pluto won back its old title. It didn't. Pluto still fails the modern planet test because it shares its neighborhood with the rest of the Kuiper belt. It never cleared its lane. It is not the master of that region the way Earth or Jupiter is. But that turns out to be the least interesting thing about it. Because not a planet sounds like a downgrade. What New Horizons found was an upgrade in mystery. In 2006, the same year Pluto was demoted, NASA launched a probe to meet it anyway. New Horizons was light, fast, and built for one brutal reality. Pluto is unbelievably far away, and this mission would get one chance. One pass, that was it. No orbit, no slow survey, no second lap for cleanup shots. NASA fired this thing off Earth at enormous speed, used Jupiter as a gravity slingshot, and sent it on a nearly 10-year chase into the dark outer solar system. By the time it finally arrived in July of 2015, people had waited almost a decade for a flyby that would last only hours. Imagine spending years crossing an ocean just to glance through a window as the ship blows past. That was Pluto, and when the first close images came in, the old cartoon version collapsed. Pluto was not a dull grey pebble. It was layered, stained, fractured, bright in places, dark in others, and dominated by that famous pale shape we now call the heart. But the heart is not the real twist. The real twist is that part of it looks young, geologically young. That smooth western lobe, Sputnik Planitia, is a giant basin of exotic ice, and it is so strangely fresh that it barely shows the kind of crater damage you would expect from billions of years in a shooting gallery. Ancient worlds keep their dents. This one didn't. That means something on Pluto has been resurfacing the ground, erasing old damage, rewriting the surface long after a world that small should have gone quiet. And now the case gets weird. Because when most people hear ice world, they imagine one thing: frozen, solid, hard, static, dead. Pluto breaks that picture. Out there, temperatures are so low that ordinary water ice is not the soft, slippery stuff in your freezer. On Pluto, water ice is more like bedrock. It behaves like stone. Mountains can be made from it. The stuff that moves is other ice. Nitrogen ice, methane ice, carbon monoxide ice. Volatile materials that, in Pluto's brutal cold, can freeze solid, shift, sublimate, and migrate across the surface. So the place where you expect nothing to move is moving with the wrong material. That is one of the great Pluto reversals. On Earth, rock is rock and weather is weather. On Pluto, ice starts doing part of the weather's job. Zoom into Sputnik Planitia and you can see huge polygon-shaped cells across the surface, like giant tiles. They are not decoration. They look like the signature of slow overturning motion inside the ice itself, something like a lava lamp moving so slowly it takes ages to notice. Cold did not stop motion here. Cold changed the rules of motion. That means Pluto is not just sitting there holding its shape. It is still processing energy somehow, slowly, quietly, but enough to matter. And this is the point where the old question stops working. The question is no longer, is Pluto really a planet? The question is, why is Pluto still active at all? Because it should have run out of tricks. It is small, it is remote, it lives in deep freeze. A world like that should have cooled down, locked up, and kept every wound it ever took. Instead, Pluto looks like a place that kept editing itself. Now, before the colors make this sound too dreamy, there is an important correction. Some of the most famous images of Pluto are color-enhanced. They are not fake, but they are boosted so scientists can better see differences in composition across the surface. If human eyes were standing there, Pluto would not look quite as vividly painted as the processed images suggest. But that does not weaken the discovery, it strengthens it. Because even after you strip away the boosted palette, the real evidence is still there. The basin, the flow patterns, the strange contrast between bright volatile ice and darker ancient terrain, the fact that the surface does not behave like a dead relic. Beautiful is optional, active is the problem. And Pluto's atmosphere makes the problem worse. You would expect almost nothing up there. The gravity is weak, the sunlight is faint, the world is tiny. But New Horizons found a real atmosphere, thin and delicate, stretching above the surface in layered haze, not a thick sky like Earth's, more like a ghost of one, a faint, structured envelope hanging over the edge of the world, and under the right lighting, it glows blue. That is a ridiculous thing to be able to say about Pluto. A tiny world at the edge of the solar system has a blue haze. Those layers are made from tiny particles formed high in the atmosphere where sunlight drives chemistry in gases like methane. The products drift and settle. Over time, they can help paint parts of the surface with darker reddish material. So even here, at the edge of the sun's reach, Pluto has a kind of climate story, a cycle, a chemistry, a sky interacting with the ground. This is not just a rock with frost on it. This is a system. And halfway through the case, the target changes. At first, it looked like NASA had solved Pluto by finally seeing it. But seeing Pluto only exposed a deeper crime scene. Because once you know the surface is young in places, once you know the ice is moving, once you know the atmosphere is layered and chemically active, the mystery moves underground. What is the engine? Where is the energy coming from? That question drags us beneath the crust, into one of Pluto's strangest possibilities. There are enormous features on Pluto that some scientists interpret as cryovolcanoes, not volcanoes that spit lava. Volcanoes built from icy slush, water-rich material, and other frozen compounds forced upward from below. One of the biggest suspects is Right Mons. It rises several kilometers high and spreads across a huge area. It does not look like the neat cone of a classic volcano on Earth. It looks broader, stranger, more collapsed, more battered by alien rules. But that is exactly why it matters. On Pluto, if something erupted, it would not erupt by Earth's script. It would erupt by Pluto's. Fire is not the point. Internal transport is the point. Something may have been pushing material upward through the crust on a world where that should be difficult to imagine, let alone prove. And the moment you allow that possibility, another forbidden thought enters the room. Liquid water. Not on the surface, not lakes under a sky you could walk through, but buried deep below, trapped beneath the shell, possibly insulated and preserved far longer than intuition wants to allow. Scientists do not treat that as fantasy anymore. Current models and evidence make a subsurface ocean inside Pluto a real possibility, and that is where the case becomes almost insulting to the old picture. Because Pluto was supposed to be the little leftover. Instead, it may be a differentiated world with a complex interior, active surface transport, a real atmosphere, and signs that internal heat did not vanish on schedule. This is not a failed planet. This is a world that makes failed planet sound like a lazy label. And Pluto may not be acting alone. Look at Charon. Pluto's largest moon is enormous compared to the world it orbits. So large that the two bodies behave less like a normal planet-moon pair and more like a locked duet. They are tidally locked to each other. The same face of Charon always looks at Pluto, and the same face of Pluto always looks back. They do not simply swing around one body at the center. They revolve around a point in empty space between them. That is one of the eeriest images in the outer solar system, a world and its moon circling a center you cannot see. And it hints that Pluto's history may have been shaped by violence. Many scientists think Pluto and Charon were born from a massive collision early in the solar system's history. A giant impact could help explain why the system looks the way it does now, and why Pluto might have retained or redistributed heat in ways that still matter. Even the giant heart may be part of that deeper story. Sputnik Planitia sits in a suspicious place, and some researchers have argued that this basin may have affected how Pluto oriented itself over time, possibly because of a buried mass anomaly linked to deeper structure, maybe even an ocean beneath the crust. That is not a small footnote. That means the most famous feature on Pluto may not be a decoration. It may be evidence of interior structure powerful enough to help reorient an entire world. So the heart is not what saved Pluto. The heart is what turned Pluto into a case file, and the final twist is that NASA did not stay. New Horizons was never built to settle into orbit and watch seasons change. It was built to sprint past, grab what it could, and keep going. The close encounter lasted only a short time before the spacecraft kept moving into the Kuiper belt, deeper into the scattered frontier beyond Neptune. Humanity got one fast look, and that one look was enough to ruin the clean textbook version forever. Because the neat story was this: Pluto is a small frozen leftover, interesting mostly because people argued over the word planet. The real story is harsher and better. Pluto is a distant world that should have gone cold, still showing signs that parts of it did not. It has a surface that appears to refresh itself, ice that convects, glaciers of materials we do not normally imagine as landscape, a thin blue atmosphere, strange chemistry, possible cryovolcanism, a moon so oversized it changes the whole geometry of the system. And somewhere beneath all of that, maybe a hidden reservoir of ancient heat and water refusing to disappear. That is why Pluto lingers. Not because we feel nostalgic for the ninth planet, but because New Horizons found something much harder to categorize. A world that failed one definition and shattered 100 assumptions. And that may be the real lesson of Pluto. Classification is useful. It is not the same thing as understanding. At the far edge of the solar system, NASA did not just find a demoted planet. It found a frozen crime scene, still full of evidence, still missing the final answer. And that means Pluto was never the ending of the story. It was the clue,